Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're here to discuss one of the most pressing and complex challenges facing communities across the country, homelessness. While national crime rates have declined, the rise in visible homelessness, people living on the streets and in encampments, has led to a substantial amount of 911 calls and growing public concerns. This trend has sparked intense conversations about community safety, and policymakers and researchers are exploring the tension between the perception of safety and the reality of being safe. What we do know is the reality for people experiencing homelessness is dramatically higher rates of violence and mortality, and a cycle pulling them in and out of the justice system. Spoiler alert, there is not a single solution to address this complex issue. Homelessness isn't a one-size-fits-all problem. Each person's journey is unique. While a greater number of individuals experiencing homelessness have mental health disorders and/or substance use issues, over half do not. Many people experiencing homelessness have been through serious trauma, while others hit a major hurdle in life that left them needing a little extra support. If communities want to effectively address homelessness, they will need to tackle it from multiple angles and in partnership with a variety of stakeholders. While there is no single answer, there are strategies being tested and implemented across the country that are worth exploring. Today's webinar will highlight different approaches to addressing homelessness. We've invited respected individuals from a diverse spectrum of political backgrounds and various roles within the field. Thank you again for being here. I am Liesl Pettis with the R Street Institute, a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to common sense solutions that make government work smarter and more effectively. Today's panel is set up a little differently. Well, we've asked each panelist to give a short talk or presentation about a program or solution they've worked on to address homelessness. After all have presented, we'll open up to attendees so you can ask all your most pressing questions about how these initiatives work. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A as we go along, and I'll read them at the end, or you can keep them until the end. So we are going to start off with Rachel Solov. She is the Chief Deputy District Attorney at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office in California. She's been a prosecutor since 1999 and has prosecuted complex cases such as stalking, threats, sexual assault, and homicide. She currently is responsible for the Special Operations, Juvenile, Economic Crimes, and Collaborative Justice Divisions, as well as Criminal Justice and Mental Health Reform Strategies at the office. Ms. Solov is served as the Association President of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals from 2009 to 2013. She was the first woman president in the history of the association. She's also a certified threat manager and has received a Distinguished Achievement Award for her significant contributions to the field of threat assessment and management. Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Definitely my pleasure to be here to talk about this issue. So in the 6 minutes that I have, I'm going to talk fast because I'm going to fit a lot of information here. But what I am going to talk about is a tech solution that we have created or come up with to help with the dealing with the unhoused population in San Diego. To kind of set the framework for that, just a little background about San Diego. We're a county of over 3.3 million people. We're the second largest county in California. We're a border community. We are right on the border with Mexico. We have really good weather. And so it tends to draw a lot of people because they don't have to deal with some of the environmental issues that they have to in other jurisdictions. If they are unhoused, they can live or try to live on the beach. So we have a very large homeless population that has been challenging for us to deal with. The other challenge that we face is that we have many different cities within our county. And so we have 9 different law enforcement agencies throughout the county, which makes it challenging to come up with solutions that can help the entire county. So what we found, our experience has been over the last few years, is that the prosecutor is sort of a natural convener to help address some of these issues because we are the one agency that has jurisdiction over the entire county, whether it be in the unincorporated areas that the sheriff controls or the cities that have the different police agencies. So in 2018, we did a multidisciplinary symposium, about 300 people, that addressed mental health issues in the criminal justice system. We're trying to stay in our lane of when these issues intersect with the criminal justice system. After that, we did sequential intercept mapping and came up with a bunch of solutions to address when mental health issues intersect with the criminal justice system. And then the follow-up to that was in 2022, and it was a 3-point plan to address specifically homelessness. There's a lot of crossover between mental health issues, obviously, in substance use disorder and homelessness, but we wanted to really focus on the homeless part of the problem. And so our 3-point plan to address this was, first was a technological solution, which I'll talk about. The second was some legislative work to expand the definition of grave disability. We wanted to allow for someone to be temporarily held and assessed when they were deteriorating psychologically. In fact, we wanted to wait before they hit rock bottom. Our rationale behind that was, you know, if someone has cancer, you know, as a stage 1 cancer patient, you don't tell them to go home and come back when you're stage 4 and we'll treat you. You start treating it right away. So we thought that it would be really beneficial to be able to get in earlier. There were some efforts that did not quite address everything that we wanted to, but some legislation that passed in SB 43, which did expand the definition of grave disability. And in San Diego, that is going to be implemented starting in January. And it allows also for involuntary treatment of substance use disorder, severe substance use disorder. So that was one point. And the third point was to expand our collaborative courts, our help courts, to be able to really target the issues that address homelessness, not a one-size-fits-all, but to really do individual case planning for individuals and try to get them on the right path. And so that kind of sets the framework, but what I'll spend my last few minutes talking about is the technological solution that we came up with, which stemmed out of work that we did with victims of human trafficking and domestic violence, where there was an app that was created that could find housing for those individuals fleeing very violent situations in under 10 minutes. And it was sort of an assessment screening that went through on a phone-based app that outreach workers could do and make the connection right away. So our district attorney, my boss, said, why can't we use this for the homeless solution? We were hearing people, outreach workers say there's no transparency, there's no accountability. We know there's beds open, but we call and they won't give them to us because they have a relationship with another worker. We also have cities that very much want to save their bed space for people within their city, which is absolutely understandable if they're funding them. And so we also didn't have a lot of good data on what beds are available, right? And where are matches not being made? Is it because of mental health issues? Is it because the person has a pet? Is it because it's a family? Is it because there are special needs? Whatever it is, where are we not making these matches? And what data do we have so that people who are making those decisions of what resources to put towards shelter beds can do it wisely and build what's actually needed? We also looked at our data in our own case management system to look at the charges that we're filing and what percentage of them are of individuals who are unhoused, and also victims, like what percentage of our victims are unhoused and are therefore being targeted by a lot of our crimes. No surprise, we found highly increased rates of people as defendants and victims in our cases. And so that really drove sort of why we're getting in this lane in the first place, because it's a little bit untraditional for a prosecutor's office to be the one saying to our behavioral health services, our health and human services, hey, this is the solution we need. And so what this does is it's sort of like a concept like booking.com. You know, you can go on and book a hotel room in instantly based on how much you want to spend, what kind of view you want, you know, how many beds you want, whatever it is. Do you need an ADA compliant room or not? How much you want to spend? We can do that instantly on our phones. And so we thought, why can't that work in the homeless population where you have the inventory and then you have the outward workers that can just do that instantaneously on the phone? So that's what we've built. It's currently in beta testing. It's being used in our North County by a group of service providers, shelter, and also law enforcement. And what it does is it asks just a very few questions. The point of it is maybe counterintuitive at first, but to get to know as soon as possible so that people don't waste time. So it's a quick screener of, you know, sex offender, arson offender, because those are a lot harder to find, age, all that kind of stuff. It makes an instantaneous connection to whatever shelter space is available. And then from there, the outreach worker connects with the shelter. The shelter still has autonomy to refuse people. If, for example, yes, they have this open bed, but let's say half their staff is out with COVID or out for something, and they just don't have the staffing to fill that bed right now. So they still have that ultimate discretion on whether to fill it. The other really cool thing, I think in the long term, is that it will tell us where we're not making the matches. Like, are we not able to find a match for this person because they have a disability or because they're a veteran or because they have a pet? What is it that we're missing so that the politicians who are making the decisions about where the resources go will have the data to fill that? So that is definitely lightning round and very quick information. There's obviously a lot more details to it that I'd be happy to share. It's like I said, it's in beta testing. It's so far very successful, and we're looking to roll it out to the rest of the county the first of the year.
Thank you, Rachel. I know it's fast and furious. I do think it's so important to hear how prosecutors are getting involved in this space, because I don't think it's as intuitive of that stakeholder to get most involved. So I really appreciate all your information. And again, people can drop their questions into the chat or the Q&A. We are going to go on next to Sonia Harper. Sonia has been a director of Mecklenburg County's Criminal Justice Services Department in North Carolina since 2016. In her position, she is responsible for the oversight of the county's pretrial services, recovery courts, reentry services, forensic evaluations unit, and criminal justice research and planning. She and her team are also responsible for promoting improvements in the local criminal justice system through interagency cooperation, coordination, and planning. Ms. Harper came to the county from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, where she worked as a project director for the National Drug Court Resource Center. In that role, she provided instruction and technical assistance on program development and program improvement processes to more than 2,800 drug courts. Additionally, she has prior experience serving as the director of Wake County's drug treatment courts, working as substance abuse program manager and probation officer. Sonia.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the time to be here this afternoon. So I did just put together just a few slides to help kind of walk through, our program here in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. Mecklenburg, our county seat here is the city of Charlotte. So we are one of the largest urban centers within the state of North Carolina. And for us, our programming here is a little bit different. I will share what kind of got us into this space was really about 2016. The North Carolina Department of Adult Correction provided us some funding to be able to help folks that were re-entering from state prisons and were coming to Mecklenburg County, to help those folks that were re-entering, with things like housing deposits and some of those initial fees and things to move into housing. And so we had just, kind of started work in that space. But what we kind of quickly found is that we had a lot of folks that started coming back to us telling us like, hey, I can't find anybody who will rent to me. I can't find, anyone that'll let me stay because of, my record. Can you guys help me find a place to live? And so that's where this, kind of started to spawn from. So we found ourselves getting into that space. And what we found is that, even us as a county department, really were met with a lot of challenges in being able to assist our folks with finding housing. And so
Sonia, real quick. We
Yes.
can see your second slide. I think it's we can see your full presenter view. I don't know if you can change that on your end.
I thought I just had.
And if not, I think it's okay, but
How about now?
perfect.
You can
Thank
now?
you. Yeah, you're good to
Okay.
go.
All right. Sorry about that. So like I was saying, we decided to really kind of, got together to brainstorm and start thinking about like, okay, if we're being met with a lot of challenges within our community to find housing, we need to kind of, think outside of the box and do something different. And so we basically started reaching out to folks in our community that were private property owners and taking a look at like what the housing stock was, out within Mecklenburg County, and more specifically the city of Charlotte, since that's where the vast majority of our folks are. We held a sort of like what we called a landlord breakfast to really sort of introduce ourselves to the folks out there in the community that were, again, private property owners, property management companies, apartment complexes, to again introduce ourselves to them, what work we were doing and what we were trying to do to be able to support our population. And from that first landlord breakfast, we ended up with like three property owners, and so therefore 3 houses. So basically, kind of like the crux of all of this is we really kind of lease houses from private property owners within our community, and we utilize those houses to house our folks that are coming through our department. And again, sort of why we got into this space is, again, there was a growing need when we started this with our reentry population, because that is one of our units here within CJS. So our folks that are coming out of our state and federal prisons returning to Mecklenburg County, that was our initial target population. And again, a lot of our folks were being met with a lot of challenges, again, criminal history being one of those. Folks with sex offense records were also met with even more additional, restrictions and stuff with geography related to housing. Affordability is a real thing in Charlotte. It has become, over the years, more increasingly expensive to live here. And then in addition to that, a lot of our folks, because of their histories, they weren't eligible for vouchers or any of these sort of, subsidy programs and things that are out there. And then there were also restrictions in some of our shelter systems and things. So, our end goal here at Criminal Justice Services is really to be able to, is to do things and put programming and services and things in place to help, address community safety. And so with our housing, vendor housing network, we are looking to really kind of increase the number of beds that are available to folks with criminal histories here in our community. Again, we're looking to reduce a lot of those barriers. Here within the department, as with all of our services, we offer a variety of different sorts of wraparound services. So that being, if you need assistance with employment, vocational training, basic needs things like, clothing, food, whatever it is, we really do try to be able to address those and provide those supports. And then again, we're looking also amongst most of what we do here at CJS is to reduce recidivism. Again, our criteria here, again, we try not to make things so restrictive that folks aren't eligible or that folks can't be successful. We really believe in meeting folks where they are. Again, we started this within our reentry unit, but over time we were able to expand it. So now if you are accessing any service or program through CJS and you're in need of housing, you can access housing through our vendor housing network. And so, if you come to us through our pretrial services unit, you come to us through our recovery courts unit. If you're coming to us, through our forensic evaluations unit, where we do a lot of our mental health and homeless work, you are also eligible for housing, through the network. Again, you just had to be a resident of Mecklenburg County and have had a history of incarceration within the last year. And particularly for those that come out of prison, if they don't have a housing plan, we do have folks that come out of custody and they're like, hey, I'm released. I don't want to have anything to do with the system. I appreciate the offer of help. I don't want it. We tell them that's okay. You have up to a full year. So if things, if you get out there and it's not as easy as you thought it would, you could be, then you can come back within that 1 year and you're still eligible for all of our services. And with housing, we do need folks to be, compliant with any mental health or treatment recommendations. You do have to be, independent to a certain degree to be able to be in the housing network. And again, to be in housing, you do in fact do need to participate in our case management services that are offered. We do make that a requirement. And so basically how this works is, again, we contract for houses with property owners within our community. And when folks are in need of housing, we move that person into that home. CJS, Criminal Justice Services, the department, we pay the first 3 months of rent in full to the property owner. And then at that point, the client or the participant starts to take on a portion of the rental cost. One of the other things is when you come into housing, if you're not working, we also work with you to be able to secure employment. So at that fourth month is a 70-30 split, then the next month to a 60-40. And ideally, we like folks by the 6th month to be able to take on the full amount of the rent. And the rent is a already preset negotiated price that the department has established with the landlord. And so the landlord cannot increase the price or try to charge more rent or anything. We have already established that rental rate and have negotiated that with a part of that contractual agreement that we have with the property owner. For those that are participating in any kind of vocational programming or seeking, or are participating in mental health services or things like that, again, we will agree to pay the full amount of the rental costs while that participant is taking part in programming. Again, we're not looking for this to be any sort of disruption or anything like that. Also, for those that would be eligible for Social Security or disability benefits, we do have a SOAR worker here within the department. So those folks that would meet that eligibility, we also get them connected with that SOAR caseworker to begin that application process. And just in doing that, if they are eligible and are able to receive SSI or SSDI, that also opens up other opportunities for them for housing, healthcare, and a variety of other things. We will take referrals from pretty much anywhere. Again, our biggest part through our reentry comes from the state and federal prisons. We also work very closely with the state and federal probation officers here within Mecklenburg County. We also will accept cases from the local jail. We get a lot of referrals from the public defender's office, as well as from some of the other folks amongst the local bar. Folks can also, self-refer. Family members can also refer. So again, we don't look to set a lot of, restrictions and, on our programming, particularly in housing, considering the numerous challenges and barriers associated with it. For numbers, we have kind of over the years seen the program kind of gradually increase. Again, in that fiscal year 20, that right there was the year that we piloted. And so that was our first, the first houses that we brought in. We started with 3 and then gradually increased. We closed out the past fiscal year 24, having housed a total of 140 people that fiscal year. And for us, I mean, we had 59% of those folks successfully exit housing. And for us, what a successful exit is that person leaves our vendor network and is able to secure permanent housing on their own, or they have also assumed 100% of the rental cost with the vendor. Here within the department, we track recidivism out 2 years. So we define recidivism as an individual finds himself back in custody within a 2-year period upon exit. And so for us, we have, since we started this program, have gradually started to see decreases in recidivism. And so you can see fiscal year 20 is when we actually formally launched with our first houses. Those years prior was when we were doing the work of really trying to, help folks pay like their deposits and things and secure housing. So we've seen as we've been able to house more people, over time, and actually as we've kind of expanded our array of services, we have seen the recidivism rates, gradually decline. And that's both for our housed and our unhoused folks. And our unhoused folks don't mean that they're necessarily street homeless or anything like that. They're just not seeking or receiving the housing service, through the department. But across all of our programs here, folks are eligible for all the different wraparound services that we provide. But overall, I mean, we are looking at relatively low recidivism rates, again, 2 years out. And so we're not unhappy with that.
This is really great information, Sonia, and I will be sharing stuff at the end if they need to get in touch with people. If you want to unshare your screen, we're going to jump to the next. I'm sorry, these are rapid for a reason, so you can get a little touch of everything. We are next going to go to Lieutenant Corbett. Are you there? Perfect.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, John Corbett is a lieutenant and 20-year veteran of the Frederick Police Department in Maryland. He has held positions in the patrol division, the street crimes team, the drug enforcement unit, and internal affairs. He was also the primary defense tactics instructor at the department's training academy for 10 years. Lieutenant Corbett is currently commander of the Special Operations Division, overseeing the School Resource Officer Team, the Directed Patrol Team, the Crisis Response Team, the UAS Team, the Chaplain Corps, and the Volunteer Auxiliary Team, and has administrative oversight of the Crisis Negotiation Team. Lieutenant, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So a little background with Frederick. We are the second largest city in the state of Maryland with a population of approximately 80,000. So like any other city of any appreciable size, we do have a significant unhoused population as well. Back in 2012, then Chief Dine created the Directed Patrol Team. This was a small group of officers who were tasked with addressing the unrelenting quality of life complaints that were inundating the inboxes and telephone lines of the chief, the mayor, our elected officials. And these complaints were coming from downtown business owners, residents, and visitors. We do have a very active downtown tourist economy. And so Chief wanted some solutions. So when we looked closer at the nature of these complaints and what they entailed, we saw that the overwhelming majority of them revolved around the undesirable behaviors of our unhoused population. So I'm talking about public urination and defecation, panhandling, littering, loitering, trespassing, etc. And so we applied the tools that we had at the time, which is arrest and citation. And certainly our officers are trained and continue to be trained and did attempt outreach to engage people with the resources that we have in the city. Like any other city, we do have those resources. We have a shelter, we have a food bank. You can get free breakfast, lunch, dinner. There's housing assistance. We have all of the same things that I'm sure every other city has. But trying to get people to engage is very challenging. What we found is that we were playing I like to call it whack-a-mole, if you're familiar. And we were just chasing the problem from one place to another, really not solving any issues in the long term. So it became demoralizing and frustrating for the officers to know that, despite our best efforts and our best intentions, really, we're just not causing any positive change in the community. Fast forward to 2019. The Frederick County Health Department approached us with something called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. This is a program that originated out in Seattle, Washington in 2011. And when I first heard about it, to be perfectly frank, and speaking now to any other law enforcement members in the audience, the first thing that went through my head is this sounds like a get out of jail free card. Just another way to kind of, push us out of the picture and give tacit permission to continue doing the things that you're doing. But I needed to be open to other solutions and other ideas because what we were doing simply wasn't working. We recognized from the outset that we were not going to arrest and cite our way out of underlying and unaddressed mental health, substance abuse issues, and homelessness. But again, these were the tools we had. So I listened to what the health department had to say, and we did have to figure out some of the ground rules of how this could look here. And we engaged with the health department in a pilot program. In getting ready for that pilot program, we identified a specific area of our downtown. We went into our records management system and drew an imaginary line around downtown. And I pulled all the calls for service data in that area related to the most common complaints we were receiving. So again, the trespassing, the loitering, the panhandling, and so forth. There's 10 or 12 call for service types. And so I wanted to establish a baseline. So in 2019, we had 1,078 of those specific calls for service in that area of downtown. And that was consistent with the numbers over the past several years in that 1,000 range. So that was our baseline. And for us, there are a lot of social justice goals identified in the LEAD program nationally, not all of which felt good to me. But what I was very clear about with the health department and moving forward is that we're looking for a reduction in those calls for service. We can agree on that and we can agree on a lot of things, but that's got to be the most important barometer of success for us. So we started a pilot program, and our directed patrol team officers were very familiar with the environment, very familiar with the people, knew their histories in most cases. And so they were paired up with harm reduction providers employed by the health department under a grant. And these are people in long-term recovery with lived experience. And we did walk-alongs with them to introduce them to the area and the people. And they brought a level of legitimacy and credibility to that outreach that our officers couldn't achieve on their own because they didn't have that same experience and background. And so we went through the pilot program, and then of course the pandemic hit shortly thereafter. Had to put things kind of on hold for a little while, but once we got it up and running, we found some bright points, some success stories that we had right away, and we're able to gradually build the program out, and we developed buy-in. We generated buy-in throughout the agency by sharing these stories and by introducing people to the providers. And so they could see that this is an authentic diversion program, that there were a number of things that they were trying to do to interrupt the negative behavior that we in law enforcement were having to deal with, and that helped to build buy-in as well. We were able to expand the program out department-wide, and I do have a lot of stats, but one thing I'll share with you real quick is that while there are still a few crusty old dinosaurs here who still look at this as a get-out-of-jail-free card, the vast majority of officers understand the benefit. They see an interruption in that cycle of arrest and release, and 85% of our referrals to LEAD now are what we call social referrals. So these are officers who are encountering people who have these underlying and unaddressed needs, and are able to refer them to LEAD, get LEAD on the scene. That was one of the caveats that we wanted with the program, is that there would be a response, an immediate response, so that we're meeting people where they are when they're in need, and not waiting for them to walk into a clinical setting on their own later. And so 85% of our referrals are social referrals. And remember that number I started off with, 1,078 of those specific call types in that area. By 2022, that number, at the end of 2022, that number had dropped to 472. That's a better than 50% reduction. And I hope the ears are perking up on our law enforcement audience members right now. And then by the end of 23, that number has dropped down to 68. So we're looking at a 94% reduction in the specific call types generated by our unhoused population in what is our economic engine of the city. And if that's not a success story, I don't know what it is. So we continue to move forward with LEAD, and I think the real strength is another key component for us is that it's not just us in the health department. It's our prosecutor's office, it's our Office of Public Defender, it's parole and probation, it's our mayor's office and our local leadership. So we have a lot of people intersecting from various points within the criminal justice system and some outside of it. There's some providers who are members of the program as well. And we continue to receive success stories, like one I'll share with you very briefly. I reached out to my counterpart at the health department for a most recent success story. So I'm going to read what she gave me. She said, our most recent huge success shows how continued long-term engagement can lead to change when the person is ready. We'll just call him BH. He was referred a year ago as an arrest referral for a trespassing charge. He was camping on private property. The officer, in lieu of making the arrest, called LEAD. LEAD came to the scene. He relocated his campsite to avoid further interactions with law enforcement, and he connected to harm reduction services. He engaged with a case manager on a regular basis, but he struggled to follow through on self-identified goals and was arrested for theft during his enrollment. That did not disqualify him from a continued involvement in the program. We understand that there's going to be hiccups along the road. In the last 2 months, his motivation has generated significant improvement. He's obtained a photo ID to be able to access additional resources. He's entered treatment, starting methadone and discontinuing use of illicit substances. He's now working with LEAD to resolve motor vehicle administration fines to enable the lift of the suspension on his license. He's working part-time. He has a goal of obtaining better employment with his driver's license and housing as he works to address the pending theft charge. We have some people who have successfully reintegrated into society with employment and housing. That's just one very recent example.
Thank you, Lieutenant. I'm going to stop you there just to make sure we have time for our other panelists, but some pretty impressive numbers and certainly an inspiring story. So thank you for including those.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to Judge Striano. Jennifer Striano is a Missoula Municipal Court judge in Montana. She has been on the bench since 2022. Since taking office, she has helped develop multiple programs to focus on the root causes of criminality rather than simply the result. This has included Shelter Court, which is held at the local homeless shelters, and you'll hear about here soon, and the PASS program, which is a pretrial assistance program, which incorporates case management for defendants during the pretrial stage. Prior to taking the bench, Judge Striano was a public defender for 15 years, the majority of that time in the Major Crimes Unit, handling complex felony cases throughout the state of Montana. 2012, Judge Striano received the Ken Koski Award, which recognizes exceptional leadership and public defense, and was the highest honor in the agency. In 2015, she was awarded the Lawyer of the Year by the Montana Association of Criminal Defense. Judge, you're next.
All right, thank you very much. And again, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. I'll just get right into it. Yeah, so again, my background was a public defender, so I saw firsthand really the things that this court specifically, what they were doing and noticing that it was not working. So our goal really in running and also continuing in this practice is to reshape these courts, especially these lower courts. These are cases where they're misdemeanor offenses, and the root causes of misdemeanor criminality are generally, as we've all noticed, chemical dependency, mental health, poverty, things of that nature. So we really wanted to change the entire structure of the court to rather be just a place of punishment and to really a resource for the entire community. So given that, we started first a pretrial assistance program. It's called PASS, so pretrial assistance to support success. We really wanted to be specific and not using any words of like supervision and things like that, because we really want to be a very supportive program for people while they're engaging in the criminal proceedings. So generally what it is, just a real quick rundown. We have, so this was a program that there's two other judges and myself that we created, and with some community partners that we partnered up with. So it's a tier system. So there's 3 tiers, 1, 2, and 3. People appear in front of us, and based on history and nature of the offenses, we will designate them a certain tier. Tier 1 is, and again, all of this, I'll just say, comes from immense amount of research. We are very committed on best practices, and so we are basing all of these tiers based on what the research has shown for many, many years. So tier 1 is court reminders. So really just text message reminders of when their next appearance is. Tier 2 is we will do intakes with the individual, and then we will, they will also receive text messages. Again, our text messages are even research-based in terms of how frequently we'll send the text and what the text says. All of those things are, again, based on the research. And they will also do any sort of voluntary referrals for services. So that's really, it's more of a light case management. They check in once a month with the PASS people. I will also say that our text message reminders, they are from real people. They're not automated. So when somebody receives a text and they have questions, they can actually text the person back and say, you know, I don't, you know, what do I have to go to this court appearance or things of that nature. So it's not just some random computer, in which we've had a lot of feedback that the participants really enjoy knowing that somebody is on the other end of those text messages. And then tier 3 is that the participant would then needs to check in with their past support specialist twice a month, and then also get text message reminders, but also, again, a little bit of a heavier case management. Again, it's all somewhat light and all voluntary, that they are referred for services and things of that nature that they are needing assistance with. So some of the some of the referrals that we've gotten, we've been able to help people assist for public benefits. We've gotten chemical dependency evaluations, treatments, that sort of thing, applying for documents, IDs, driver's license, birth certificates, housing, assistance with employment, things of that nature, all just while their misdemeanor offense is pending. So it's really just a lot of things are happening prior to even the person making their next court appearance, which is great. Our failure to, so we've also really committed to data, and so our overall failure to appear rate is quite low. We're at 6.9%. Just a little bit about Missoula. It is the second largest city in Montana, but that's not saying a whole lot for other people. But we are a town about between 90,000 as well, so kind of similar to the last location that we heard from. And our so we do have what we would consider for our size a significant homeless population. Montana in general is statistically on the rise of homelessness, and Missoula specifically, housing has tripled in the last 2 years, and so we're definitely seeing the effects of that. Along with the data that we've been able to collect, though, we're able to see kind of who are the people not appearing the most, and really Native, female, unhoused was one of our highest percentage of the population. So then knowing that data, then we've been able to kind of trying to focus on how do we get them more engaged and try to be able to focus you know, what is the barrier? Is it childcare? Is it transportation? Things like that. So just knowing kind of a little bit more about who are the people and why they're not able to make it to court has been really helpful. Lots of data on past, but we'll move on from that. The other program that we have started is what's called shelter court. And so we hold court once a month from our homeless shelters. We have 2 in town here. And this has been something that I've always wanted to do even when I was public defender, but we had a hard no from the previous court. So I was really excited that we're able to do this. So what it is we are in the courtroom, and then we have staff attend, or they are actually at the shelters. People are signed up. We have people who have warrants, things of that nature that we kind of are looking for. But the purpose of shelter court really is to get people to clear their warrants, and so we can kind of have their cases addressed. We understand that this is a population that it's more challenging for them to actually come into the courtroom. So being able for them to appear right there where they're residing, or at least frequenting, then that is a benefit. This has grown significantly over time. We have added a lot of service providers that are at shelter court. So now we have housing navigators who are there. We have food stamps are there, so they can sign up for those benefits. Our library is super involved, and so one really neat thing that is done is that they can issue people library cards. We then can print off a booking photo right there, and then they can apply for their birth certificate right there as well. And then they can have that to use to get a driver's license or any sort of other identification that they need, which is always usually a huge barrier. So that is like a one-stop shop for them as well. We've included, or we've had a vaccine clinics there for the last few months, which has been really great. And just a lot of other service providers that that have been very supportive. And then Yeah, so I mean, just at the last shelter court, we had 39 cases were held. We had 26 warrants were quashed, so that's 26 less involved, interactions with law enforcement. That is taking it off their plate as well. 7 people checked in and renewed their status on the housing wait list. 3 people were added, 13 new clients were signed up for housing navigation. So just again, a lot of things are happening behind the scenes, all because they're making their appearances and also getting those appearances addressed in the municipal court, which is really helpful. I'll just say quickly some successes we've had. Obviously, again, just overall successes of just connecting people with resources. But just the the biggest success is we also have recently hired with a case manager who is just a case manager for the court. So she, again, just kind of assists in all of these different areas. We had a lady appear at shelter court who has been homeless, I think, for almost 10 years, has really kind of evaded other service providers because she doesn't really reach out to those types of things. She used the emergency room as her primary caregiver, and but was unable really to connect with the people that she needed to connect with. She appeared for a bad check charge at shelter court, connected with our case manager, and then continued to work with her. 2 months later, she is now currently housed for the first time in 2 months, all because she has a charge but was in the right place at the right time. So that was kind of like all of our programs kind of working together, and that is the goal for all of these to happen.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off just because we have so much time.
No problem.
I think people got a great overview of their programs, and I certainly just want to highlight how important the data is to really show that they're working and continue doing them.
Yep.
I will remind everybody who's listening, please feel free to drop in questions and answers. We're probably just going to have enough time for our speakers today, but I will make sure answers go out to any questions that come in. So please continue to send in questions if you need to. But we are going to go over to Devin now. Devin Kurtz leads the public safety policy team at the Cicero Institute, a Texas-based think tank active in policymaking in 25 states. His research and advocacy efforts have supported dozens of legislative victories on issues including police transparency, probation and parole reform, and homelessness. Mr. Kurtz's work has been featured in and reported on by numerous national publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, City Journal, National Public Radio, and the New York Times. He is the author of Sketches from Behind Prison Walls, a book of art and poetry written in collaboration with men incarcerated in Vermont. And I do want to make sure we have enough time for Terrell. So Devin, we want to give you enough time, but we just make sure we have enough time left too.
I'll be relatively brief. So the Cicero Institute was founded in San Francisco, and really in the heart of one of the worst homeless crises in the country. And we moved to Texas a few years after our founding, to Austin, and we found that a lot of the same problems that had persisted in San Francisco had spread to Texas. And as we started to work in more and more states, as Liesl said, we now are in 25, we found that a lot of the ideas that had created the San Francisco housing crisis, or homelessness crisis, spread across the country. And I caught myself on the housing crisis because I want to point out a study from University of California at San Francisco that I find frames our work. That study, which is the largest study of homelessness in history, found that less than 5% of homeless people cited housing costs as the reason that they're homeless. So we don't see it as a housing crisis. And that really informs a distinct philosophical approach that we take, which is defiantly against harm reduction and housing first. And we really are aiming at specifically improving street homelessness, not homelessness overall. We see those as distinct populations. And a lot of this is at a very basic level, pushing back against ideas of cutting law enforcement out of the picture when it comes to homelessness, because we see as high rates of criminal involvement in this population, some of which is lower level, but a lot of which is not. So we really see as law enforcement as crucial partners in that. And we also see a need to marshal the behavioral health resources across different state agencies as well as local agencies to have a multifaceted approach, but one that is centered in ultimately something that's more assertive than a lot of organizations tend to take in the advocacy space. So our model, which has been adopted by about 7 states and will likely be adopted by many, many more this coming session, as well as building on that work in those first 7, is really, it starts with enforcement. We see camping as an absolutely unacceptable part of urban life, and all of the dangers that flow from it, including criminal activity that homeless people are subjected to themselves. These are places where rates of victimization are very high, but then also crimes that they are perpetrating against each other and against broader community members. So we really see that camps cannot persist in urban centers. Enforcement is absolutely essential. But then once you've had that level of enforcement, you have to have some amount of an on-ramp into services. For us, that starts with street medicine. So making sure that when outreach workers, specifically those who are trained in behavioral health and broader mental and medical responses, are able to get Medicaid reimbursement for those services. That's a really easy change. From there, we see it sort of, you have the diversion options, you have involuntary commitment for the most severe cases, as Rachel Sullivan was mentioning. That's super important. But then there's also just a subtle change to some of the housing policies that we see. Transitional housing, which is a model that has fallen from grace with federal funding. We see that as a really important way for states to fill in some of the gaps created by the federal homelessness response that is overly focused in our view on housing first. We see housing first as part of it, but not as a one-size-fits-all solution. So yeah, as I said, we worked in about 7 states, most, I would say significantly Florida and Texas. Florida did pass a pretty sweeping camping ban, and is also redirecting about $25 million away from what we saw sort of duplicative funding for housing first with the federal government into more treatment-oriented options that can fill in some of those gaps. We plan to continue working with them to build out diversions, and they already have pretty solid voluntary civil commitment laws. But we're trying to help states really stake out a different approach from, again, what we see is ultimately a one-size-fits-all from the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Devin, for keeping it short so that we have time for Terrell. I think it's really important. You guys take a very different approach than a lot of people in this space to homelessness. And I think it's important for people to understand the different approaches, and certainly people have questions. I know Devin's ready for them, so feel free to send them in.
I won't flinch. Don't worry. You can attack me.
No personal attacks, just the policy if you have any questions. But we are going to go to our last speaker, last but certainly not least, Terrell Curtis. She has spent a majority of her professional career as an advocate and leader with homeless services and affordable housing providers in Colorado. Currently, she serves as the first executive director for the Colorado Safe Parking Initiative, a young community-driven nonprofit operating safe and legal places for unhoused people to stay in their vehicles. Prior to this role, Ms. Curtis served as executive director with Denver's Dolores Project, a high-impact shelter and housing service provider for women and transgender individuals. During her tenure there, she successfully led efforts to expand its program to include permanent supportive housing for formerly chronically homeless individuals. Ms. Curtis served on Denver's commission to address homelessness in 2011 and was invited in 2015 to participate in a stakeholder group to advise Mayor Hancock on the development and deployment of a sustainable, affordable housing fund. She's also awarded a prestigious Livingston Fellowship by the Bonfils Stanton Foundation in 2016 in recognition of her leadership to the Colorado nonprofit sector. So I'll let you close us out, Terrell.
Okay, let's see what I can get done. So I feel like a little bit of the odd guy out. I'm coming from the service provider side of things. We are a individual 501c3 that provides services for people who are unhoused and relegated to living in their vehicles. They've been able to hang on to that last remaining asset that is serving as their home, as their transportation, usually as their storage unit. So we were founded by 2 community members who just noticed what all of us see probably in our cities, is that there's a lot of people who are living in their vehicles and a lot of empty parking lots overnight. And so they just reached out, formed a little advisory group, actually a large advisory group, and put together really what at its core is a harm reduction program so that we can provide people a legal place to stay overnight where they have access to restroom facilities, which is one of the key things, and safety and security, knowing that they're not going to be moved along all night, that they're not going to be harassed or become the victims of crime. And so we partner primarily, this is a very, very community-driven program. We partner with actually mostly faith organizations who make their parking lots available overnight. So we're not talking about, you know, these massive parking lots of 100+ cars. Churches typically tend to be embedded in neighborhoods. So we're talking about 10, maybe 15 vehicles overnight that all agree to abide by sort of the golden rule and be good neighbors so that they can be the recipient of those same good neighbor ideals. We do connect people to supportive services, particularly around housing navigation, healthcare, benefits acquisition. And what we see is about 40% of the people that we serve do move on to a more stable living situation. Our measure of success is not necessarily just permanent housing, but also return to family, ability to move into shelter, going to one of our micro communities that are pallet shelters here in Denver. A lot of the reason people, looking at the time, a lot of the reason people do decide to live in their car as opposed to going into shelters. One, our shelters are typically full throughout the year, especially for women, especially for trans folks. And you can't take pets. I don't believe we have a shelter yet that officially will accept companion animals. And we know people often won't come inside if they have a companion animal. There is no shelter for couples without dependent children. So I used to run the Dolores Project, a shelter, and I heard often from women who were on the streets with a male partner and said, he's going to stay out on the streets, but he really wants me to come inside. So there are no shelters for those folks. So we usually see couples, sometimes adults with adult children, adults with adult disabled children, and also homelessness, you know, shelter and homelessness comes with such a stigma. It is a real last resort for folks. So they would prefer to stay in their vehicle. You know, even elderly women, we see a lot of growing numbers of older folks. The one success story I'll share is we had a retired college professor who her apartment building got sold, the rent got jacked up, and she was in her car with all her stuff and ended up in one of our lots and has now been housed in a senior living affordable housing building for the last 2 years. But really people just need that place to stabilize and feel safe so they can use those daytime hours productively. Phew.
I'm impressed. I was even going to give you a couple more minutes just in case. But this was terrific. I really appreciate all your guys' time today. I know this was fast and furious. Certainly you weren't able to go into all the different pieces of your programs. But I thought it was important people see all the different ways that you can address homelessness, the different perspectives to address it, and that probably one program is not going to solve a problem, that it is going to be multifaceted. So I put my email in the chat. If people do want to reach out with questions, I will make sure my panelists can answer them. Or if you want to get in touch with them to learn more, I can certainly connect you. So that is in the chat, but appreciate everybody's time today and have a good one.